Welcome to this week's Eccentric Minute, brought to you by Eccentric. Our first exercise here in the Eccentric Minute is the K-Box squat. This is the granddaddy of all of them, guys. One that we use at all levels of our training with a vast array of athletes. Couple big tips. I like to use something for our hands to support it. Make sure that strap is completely taut at the top. Don't leave it short, don't leave it long. What I really like the most about it, guys, the isoinertial wheel, we're going to use this with other squats as well. The other squats are working to depth. These, we're going to get to an athletic position and work our way up. Push hard and make sure you're fighting to hit that braking force. As we cut reps, we usually cut depth as well to make it a little bit more transferable to what we do. This is an awesome exercise that I can't recommend enough. Throw it in your training. It's going to be great for you and your athlete. I really hope you enjoyed this week's Eccentric Minute. Make sure you check them out at eccentric.com to find out everything you need about the K-Box and the K-Pulley. Being a strength and conditioning professional requires constant pursuit of better knowledge, better methods, and better means. But what if there was a place where strength and conditioning coaches could learn from some of the most innovative practitioners in the world, such as Jeff Moyer, Lachlan Wilmot, William Wayland, James the Thinker Smith, and Keir Wenham Flatt? Well, you could find multiple lectures from each of these top-level coaches and a few lectures and examples from yours truly as well, all in the Strength Coach Network. The Strength Coach Network is going to bring you well over 100 different lectures from some of the top practitioners in the world to be your one-stop shop for your continuing education and professional development. So hop on over to strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASP today and get your 48-hour trial for only $1. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASPS to get your 48-hour trial for only $1. I look forward to seeing you in the Strength Coach Network. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about some positives coming away from this work-at-home situation with Adam Ringler. We are going to sit down and start discussing right away the role of continuing education, connecting with coaches and athletes, and the unique challenges of having to work from home, and how all of these are going to impact us positively going forward in the coaching profession. Then he's going to run down the rabbit hole of return to play and really a project he's been working on and how that's going to impact his view of the entire process now in returning to sport in multiple levels for the athletes we get to work with. Then he's going to dive into, where facts and opinion kind of fit together and the discussions that we need to have with athletes and coaches, and how important it is to work the subjective and the objective together to make the best possible decision we can for the athlete. This is really an awesome talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's get right to it. So how are you doing? How are you holding up?
I'm well, man. I'm well. Trying to find a good injunction point to jump into this conversation. But, I think a couple months ago, we recorded an Outside the Rack episode and talked a little bit about some of the things that we were doing and advice. And, I think the last question resonated with me as far as some work that we were doing that I was particularly interested in. And I think I shared that. I was just like, man, I can't wait for the time where we get to kick our feet up and relax and chill. And now it seems like that's what we were given, right? We have this time now where we can actually hang out and relax and refresh a little bit. So, I'm well, man. I'm well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty well, man. So taking this time with the reflection and the refreshing, what are some things that are going through your head? Because you're not going to sit there and just be like, and just sit and wait. Like something's going to hit you and you're going to be like, okay, the wheels are turning quick here.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a couple of different things. Like I think, you've hosted plenty of these guys at this point. I've jumped on and just listened and learned a lot from. And I think we're all grasping at ways of trying to engage with our athletes, trying to find ways of connecting with them. I think NCAA came out, or at least Power 5 and Pac-12 conference came out with some stipulations yesterday and some guidelines of what we're permitted to do. And I think we're all just sort of now trying to figure out how can we continue to A, prepare these guys for whenever their inevitable return will be, but B, what can we do to, you know, uh, keep engaged with them, to keep in conversations with them within what's permitted by the NCAA. And so I think we're all sort of just grasping at continuing to try to enrich what we do with these guys. So, a lot of what I've been up to the last couple days, I suppose, is just, engaging in conversations and continuing to chat and continuing to produce materials for our student athletes, the ones that I'm, privileged to work with. And then also, like, this is a great time to just sort of think and reflect about what went well, what didn't go well, what we can try to improve on. A lot of us is, I think, working behind the scenes as far as like all the great things that we talk about, like wanting to do, like the projects. Oh man, this would be great if we could, standardize recovery protocols or standardize, a return to play, or at least get outlines, a skeletal frame of some of these things. And now, like those things somewhat get pushed to the side when you're on the floor coaching all the time, or at practice, or traveling or whatnot. So like, this is such a good opportunity, I think, to actually leverage the time that we have to actually sit down and do it. I think the challenge for us then just becomes carving out time within a chaotic, work from home type situation to be able to find some quiet time to do it.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I've learned the most right now is that working from home, like there's different groups of people that are gonna have different challenges, right? Like,
yeah,
you being able to sit down and crunch numbers and outline things, I'm sure gets interrupted,
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
like me being here, just me and the dog, like there's days where I've sat here and I've looked up after one of these calls with like calls with the kids and putting programs in the computer and like videos for Coach Me Plus and figuring out what we're doing next. And look up and I'm like, it's 7:30 and I haven't eaten lunch yet.
yeah,
And I'm just like, all right, this is going to get old. But I think that one thing that you brought up, you brought up what worked and what was good and what wasn't. Of course, I want to talk about that a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
But like, I think the outlining and development of return to play protocols right now, I think is something that can be really, A, could be a great project, and B, can be something that like, we all bitch about that, bro. Like everybody.
yeah, yeah.
It's like, oh, well, they just went from 2 minutes of practice to 40 minutes in a game. Like, yeah. No, it's like, how are we going to be able to better modify, monitor, and implement things so that we can move forward?
Yeah, no doubt. I think, and that's even if it's just a skeletal frame, right? Like an outline or recommendations, it gives us a good launching off point to have conversations with our ATs, to be able to sit down with sport coaches and be like, this is the skeletal frame that we're going to operate. It's not going to be time based, but it's going to be criteria based, and these are the marks that we're looking for. These are both the objective and subjective markers that we want them to achieve before they progress to the next state. But then you start looking at like, from a weight room, from a sports performance standpoint, like how can we extrapolate those almost like post-surgical criteria based return to plays to hamstring strains or soft tissues or shoulder strains, rotator cuffs. And that's an exercise that you could go, up the kinetic chain and try to develop some things just to, work ahead a little bit. If we do have this time of setting this up, if, we have, tendopathies that we need to sort of, again, rehab back, like what are our protocols? And you might not need to follow that plan exactly, but at least gives you a frame to reference from, allow you enough deviations off of that plan to be able to make adjustments that's, acute to and unique to each athlete.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that especially developing like skeletal things, or
Yeah.
even like, I don't know if this is how I'm going to say it, even like just specific plug and plays, like pull this piece out, put that piece in, as like kind of a pre-developed model with sports med,
Yeah.
I think is going to end out saving us a lot of headaches in the future.
I think something too, like, so all of us are working remotely, right? So we had a conversation with one of our athletic trainers yesterday that's wanted to go back through all of the well-being questionnaires, right? And there's this anterior posterior view of like muscular soreness and things that are tight, stiffness and soreness charts, right? This is not like unique to one platform, right? Like Coach Me Plus has this. I'm sure like Kinduck and a number of different AMS softwares have this, but like he was sort of looking at, and he was like, well, I want to go back and look at all the soreness within the last, 7, 14, 21, sort of 28 days, and sort of individualize some rehab or prep programs for these guys. If they're constantly rating my hip flexors tight, my hips flexors sore, then, like perhaps I can individualize some soft tissue work for them so that when they're at home, they can actually address and self-organize some of these tissues. So it's like, yeah, I think we could do that. We could extrapolate that to like, if you're constantly having shin pain because you're in a jumping or decelerative type sport, then perhaps there's some things that we can do preparatory to help, again, in this time period, like what are we doing to A, load the tissues, or B, correct for some of the faulty mechanics or, unnecessary loading that these guys have, or,
Yeah, and then on top of that, dude, what are we allowing them to do to deload from us a little bit?
True. Yeah. Like you said this, I forget who you had on when you were just talking about, and this is something that's resonated with me, is like if we get back from this thing and bodies are fresher and performing better, like what does that say about the model, the collegiate model that we have, where there is no time, there is no deload of tissues, right? Like maybe this is an opportunity or a blessing in disguise where we're actually allowing like we sometimes like nudge each other, right? And we're like, oh man, it's grind doesn't stop, ball doesn't stop ever, right? Like, and it's maybe this is like a forced stop for us a little bit, and actually maybe our athletes will come back a little bit fresher, and some of the chronic knee pain or tendonitis that people have throughout the course of the long season, maybe that stuff will just again go away a little bit. It does worry me a little bit when we start to come back and we're talking about, I'm seeing things come out where it's like, okay, well, we can do team meetings and break down film and things, but like, boy, there better be a plan working backwards from the date that they arrive, or whatever date that we think, if coaches are going to be quick to want to make up the time loss from a practice standpoint, right? So like, I'm just thinking about, what are we doing like from an extensive loading, plyometrics, or, again, loading to make sure that these tendons and these muscles are prepared so that I don't know when we're coming back. I'm presuming, I got some ideas, but like to work backwards from that date to make sure that we're preparing them for when they do arrive, that we're not setting them up for, catastrophic injuries.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. And I think that eventually we're all going to have an answer to the when, right? And what's crazy is I think that there's going to be a lot that are different.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some that are like late June. There may be some that are early July. There may be some that aren't till August, right? And it's then, I guess, looking at it in a multitude of ways. Like the first thing that we probably should do, if I were to guess, is backtrack and basically start over. Because right now, I mean, I don't know how other people are doing this, but I'm just trying to fill buckets that we've never filled, really. Like a lot of volume body weight stuff is not, it's the best we can do for the most part with a lot of these kids. And, even like conditioning stuff is just completely going to be, like the running will be different if they have a place they can do it, right? Like I'm not going to send a kid who lives in Harlem and be like, let's go run some shuttles, because that's probably not, let's just go measure a block out and just, run back and forth as fast as you can.
Classic.
I would love that. What up, Andre? But yeah, or like the guy who just hopped on is in Finland. Like, they're still cold, and it's like, how much am I going to ask him to go outside and run, But when we look at it, it'll end up being like backing it up 8 weeks and saying, all right, hopefully you've been with your group long enough to understand what the demands are that they're going to be asked to go through. So how can you prep them? Like, is it even something as simple as like doing some extensive work on grass and then finding a harder surface so that they can build up tissue resiliency slowly that way? Like a simple, like 4-week model where it's like going from grass to, if they can get to field turf or a track, or 3 weeks, and 2 weeks on the court, like, I mean, I don't know the answer to that, because that's a bridge I'm not ready to cross yet. But I think that that's a good point. Like understanding, like when they come back, that preparation time, we have to be ready for the coaches to want to go from 0 to 100.
Yeah. That's inevitably going to happen, I think. That's a conversation that, I don't think we'll win it. So we better be prepared to at least bridge the gap between where the athletes are and where the coaches want them to be, which will be a challenge, I think, for us. But, I think this is also too, like, I'd be curious and to turn this thing back around on you a little bit, just some of the programming modifications that you've had to make, because I've, like, initially when I sent out some of the packets or the remote programs, right? Like, it's very sort of 1x20-esque for me, because like, I don't know what they have access to. I have some people that live in on the 18th floor of an apartment building. I have some that have a farm ranch. I have some that have access to a small little weight room. I have some that don't. So it's like, how do you scale outside of individualizing things, which is fine. We got the time to do it.
Yeah.
But like, your conventional 5-3-1 or intensity based or, Olympic derivatives, that's all that stuff. I think it's kind of crazy that this is forcing not innovation, but forcing us to think about different strategies that you might not otherwise consider. Like, I think I've heard on a couple of these lately, like going back to having a more volume based approach rather than intensity, just because like we can add volume. That's easy to, low intensity volumes, because most of these guys won't have access to a rack or dumbbells. Most of them will be body weight. So like, okay, a couple extra more sets or a couple extra more, repetitions to each of one of these sets. How do you dose body weight programs out to be progressive when you don't necessarily know some of the limitations of facilities or access or equipment that they might have?
So total, like, candor, I think that this is what I was thinking. I'm sure if Mark McLaughlin or Val heard me say what I'm about to say, they might smack me. We basically tried to set it up so it was like a glycolytic day, and then like a longer, like aerobic-y circuit day, and then cardiac output work. So trying to follow kind of that similar, you spike, the glycolytic work, and then you bring it down, and then you just build cardiac, stuff that way. And then how I decided to spike that was like Vern Gambetta's leg circuit, because instead of just adding reps or sets, you can intensify it by saying beat your time. So then that's day 1 and day 4. Day 2 is just like a body weight circuit that's just constant movement. That's like similar to just, it's something that we used at Indiana State, and I posted it, just like normal calisthenics.
Yeah.
And then the 3rd day was, again, like cardiac output work. But if you don't have a heart rate monitor, it's got to be easy conversation paced on whatever you're using. So then that evolved to trying to have conversations with all the kids. And we now have a couple of different things going on. The first was they asked for more warm-up like things to guide them. So that's why I've been putting those flows out. And of course they ask for more just ab work, like crunches and stuff. So I'll start posting those routines too. So for that program, there's now 3 different warm-ups. There's just to get yourself moving for 10 minutes, a flow, and then an ab circuit. For the running day, it's a flow and then a skip series because they're going to run. But it's nothing crazy. It's just like forward, backward, straight ahead, crossover, open hip skips, and then some power skips. Now, it had, with the conversations, there's been some that were like, well, I can lift at home.
Nice.
So I'm like, okay, what do you have access to? So there's some that we've added just like arm farmy upper body stuff.
Yeah.
Because like I got a guy who's got a Bowflex, right? Like, okay, well, I don't know about all the other stuff with that, but you can sort of bench and row and pull and that. There have been some people that have enough dumbbells that we could do. Mike Thompson put together like a unilateral 1x20.
Nice.
So we've been able to do that and make some add and subtracts into that, just some minor alterations. And then I've got some kids that are like, I just really needed to run and like not get fat.
Yeah.
And like for them, like again, like a glycolytic day, a shorter, faster aerobic day. So either tempos or hill sprints, and then like the longer, slower distance stuff with, different warm-ups and things built in. It's been hard to build all this in the platform. Like it's taken a long time, and it's like a lot of me having to find ways to film myself, which is always interesting, especially when you watch yourself try to do something and you're like, wow, that was awful.
Honest feedback when you record it and you're like, I don't want to post this.
Yeah. Like,
this ain't good.
It's just got to be the angle. Like I can't.
Yeah.
This, but it's no, like it's like, wow, how am I going to demo this? But so then that challenge has been fun, and now it's just going to keep building out and finding more ways and getting more feedback from them. And I think that's like where a lot of these athlete management software companies are really, like, they've helped. Making me do this through Coach Me Plus is helping me be able to make these modifications and these alterations throughout the entire group, because now it's not just like, okay, I talked to Adam, boom, 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 here in this Excel sheet, send it. And then it's like, okay, well, like I'm talking to MT next week. So it's like, well, she said this, well, something totally different. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay. So I was talking and we've got this set up, and it's like, things are just written out. It's all in front of you. And you can now talk to the group individually and be like, yeah, that would help, but what about this? And it's so you can build it all and plug it in together. And it's helped not just team specific, but like cross teams too. Cause there's like things that, we've done with basketball and swim. And the other thing that's been good is it makes some of us on our staff like ask like different questions too.
Yeah.
And it makes you, when you're all using the same software, we use Coach Me Plus, Coach.
Yeah.
When you use that, you have to look at it and like you're able to look at what everyone else does. So you, instead of being just kind of like the 15,000 foot overview of like, this is what Coach X does. Now it's like, I'm actually looking at it and it's like, okay, I like how this is set up. I should steal this and move this into stuff with mine.
When you said that it's Coach Me Plus, and I'll use the umbrella of just like your athlete management software is fostering communication, collaboration across your staff, because it's forcing questions of how did you set this up versus that up. What do you find right now in this remote atmosphere that we're living in? What do you find is allowing you guys to collaborate together as a staff still, whether it's with your ATs or with other S&C coaches? What medium, I suppose?
Oh, like how are we connecting with each other?
Yeah.
Mostly text. We're gonna meet like a Zoom, which, by the way, I would love to know who the guy is in Zoom who scored every freaking college in the United States.
Right.
Like whoever that cat is, like, yo, but first round's on you, Chief, because
Right,
you're
yeah.
like swimming in it right now. But yeah, like a lot of it is just, and kind of what we've talked about as a staff is on top of like the collaborating and the questions and the open discussion with it is if you figured out something, right? Zoom stock up 47%.
Yeah.
I love you, Cav. But it's like when you figure out something, like tell us, right? Like all of this is new for people. Like I've used it for the weigh-ins, weigh-outs, and track body weights, and we used it as a way to bring all of our monitoring stuff together and for questionnaires and this, but like I've never programmed with it. So now finding better ways to manipulate the program, modify the program, build the program, and all that has been a driver for sure.
You know what's fascinating about that? And I think it just, if we were to digress a little bit from programming, so there's two books that I read recently. One is Black Box Thinking, which was recommended by another coach from Michigan State, and then Upstream by Dan Heath, right? And both these guys talk about like really trying to identify bright spots in a program or in a system, and then making sure that we are communicating that across teams. And then the most recent book was Upstream was talking about that rather than waiting for problems to come downstream and hit us, like, oh man, like where are all these injuries coming from? Like now we got to rehab these guys, looking upstream to try to prevent some of these problems from occurring in the first place. So they had a really interesting sort of system of asking, like, what errors or what failures have you made recently? And they sort of contrasted different industries in both of these books. There's a lot more parallels in these books than differences, but like what errors are in these books, and then actually communicating like problems. Like this is real familiar and common in like, I guess in the airline industry when like a real problem can have catastrophic, lives lost. But like that's been something that I've changed. So we do a lot of like stand-up meetings, like digital meetings, where it's like you come in, like we utilize Slack as a resource of keeping us connected and sharing materials rather than just always face to face. And weekly we have this question of like, hey, like what are you working on? How are things going within the projects that you're working on? What are some blockers to that? Like, are there things that somebody else on the team can help you out with? But what recent failures or mistakes have you made? And it's been really, Geekbot. I'm sure MT hates Geekbot, as most everybody does, it seems like. But like, what's really interesting in the idea of this was like, if we can be vulnerable in some respects and share what we're struggling with or what errors we make, that makes everybody else better, because then they see like, oh, like I don't have to make that mistake now. I know how I can get better. Like I can avoid that pitfall that you just walked in. And I think it's just a powerful way of like reinforcing learning, not only like championing the successes that we have, but also identifying the personal failures that we have so that we can, again, help other coaches or other people on our staff fail or, not have to repeat those failures that you've made.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
I don't know where I went with that. I blacked out, but.
But yeah, because on top of that too, right? Like not just as a preventative measure, but like you actually can find the answer too, right? Like
Yeah.
Like maybe the problem is that you don't know the answer, and like you keep doing like I joke with kids all the time when I'm like, that didn't look great. Like, how are you doing? It's like, oh well, such and such hurts. Like, but you kept doing it, and they're like, yeah. And I turned around and I walked, and I'm like, oh, wall.
Yeah. Right.
Well, like eventually you got to figure out to walk through the door, right? Like you got to let us know. So like maybe it's a situation where like you just can't see it.
Yeah.
Like someone else needs to see it and point that out,
No, that's a good observation for sure.
So then let me ask you this, man. Where are the numbers going? What are you looking at, and what are you ripping apart right now, and how? I mean, you're probably about shoulder deep. And are you in Python still, or are you?
Yeah, yeah. So Python and R are probably the two. I'm probably a little bit more proficient. And look, I am an infant in both languages compared to real data scientists and and other people that's has specialized in this field. But I'll take it back a little bit in that I don't want to like necessarily be pigeoned as like, oh man, this number guy, but like I've been transparent with you and with everybody that like there's some respects that numbers are objective, and there's something that like resonates with me about knowing and having data to support what we do, right? Because I'm trying to think of like the expression that I heard, but like so often I think sometimes in sport, the person that's more central, they call it the hippo analogy, and I forget where, I'm going to steal this, but the highest paid person's opinion usually wins, right? The hippo in the room will end up taking charge of things. And like, that's not by any means the best analogy, and that's not the best situation to be in. But like, ultimately, when you can come to a conversation with objective facts, these are the numbers, this is the facts surrounding this, it takes that subjectivity and that opinion aspect away from the conversation. So I think very early in my career, I had, a point where I felt like we were doing, and the numbers would show, the data would show that we were objectively doing what we needed to do, at least from a preparatory standpoint. But like, and you could also, like, I think as later in my career now, you could be like, well, maybe there is that sports specialization aspect. Like if we're not contributing to wins, losses, or skill acquisition, then perhaps we're part of the problem. I think back then I was like, but that's not our role or responsibility. Our role is to help prepare them for the sport, to hand them off. So skill acquisition from those educators could then take hold, and they could teach how to fundamentally execute the technical aspects of the sport. And that's where I felt like in the supply chain was lacking, right? So that began my sort of fascination with going down this rabbit hole of like, well, I want to make sure that if I want to prove efficacy of my profession, of what I do for the student athlete, then let's make sure that we have measurables that's valid and repeatable and objective, and let's make sure that we can sit down and have a conversation surrounding facts, not just opinions. Like I'm cool. Like if you want to have a conversation, we want to rap about, what do you think about that? What do I think about this? Opinions, cool. But if we're going to get down to evaluating successes and failures of a program, pitfalls and the performance, then let's make sure we're backing that up with something that's objective, that's factual, and not opinion based. So that started, databasing in Excel, and then Microsoft Access, and then these spreadsheets bloated to thousands of different rows. And then we started looking at like, well, how do I take other information and combine it and aggregate it so that we can start to have the conversations of like, when X is improving, right? Or when we have two different variables, how well are they correlating? What sort of regressions can we run off this? What trends do we see? Almost, I don't want to say predictive, but like as one thing continues to move in a direction, how does that influence another variable? And ultimately to use this in a way that we can position our athletes in the best way to absorb and adapt to the stressors, the demands of the sport. So, that's where like, I remember very early on, like looking at, I don't necessarily think even 10 years ago, athlete management softwares were really much of a thing, right? I remember when Coach Me Plus was like, I had a 6-month trial with Coach Me Plus. In the beginning days, I had zero budget to be able to afford anything like that. But like that, there was some infancy of things like Fusionetics and Coach Me Plus and these platforms that were building out. help facilitate some of these things from a platform standpoint. So, like for me, I went in it, and then these Excel documents ballooned, and then it was like, oh, well, could I use SPSS? Could I use MATLAB to do some of these stats? Because now we got all these numbers, we got these different data streams, but how do we start to combine it and actually make something meaningful out of it? If it's just data, and then you're just swimming in it. It's easy to get lost in it. But to actually change data and to transform it into information, into insight, where you can actually say, our evidence of what we've collected over the last 2 or 3 years seems to trend in this direction. So our then protocol, or our then decisions that we'll make, will support moving or supporting this particular action, right? So that's the part that I think we're still struggling with, like as a industry, is like, it's easy to collect GPS, it's easy to collect well-being metrics, or it's easy to get volumes, intensities, loading in the system. But then what are the decisions that we're making on it, and how do we then create systems to actually make those decisions easier? Rather than just looking at a spreadsheet and say, oh, we did too much, or oh, we did too little. Okay, next Tuesday, when we do the same Tuesday practice, right, like our intensity day, or maybe it's our install day after an off day, then we need to go down, or we need to reduce volumes. Well, how do we do that, right? Like, do we give them more rest to work ratios? Do we expand the session out so it's less dense, so there's less intensities? Do we change and go small sided games? Those are the actual decisions that I'm more fascinated by, not necessarily just the data. It's like, you got to start somewhere, and you got to have some objective facts, but then, like, cool, let's start making decisions based on that. Let's start setting up systems to support that. So now every day when we go into it, we're not having to think about, like, oh man, like, this is what I need to do. We can look at it and be like, okay, is our system working? Yes, no. What adaptations do we need to make to the system to make sure that we're staying within the ranges of what we need to do? So again, like, that's like a little of the numbers. Like, I think now the programming standpoint came from, we worked with a vendor that a lot of the times, like, it would go into these mainframe databases, right? These structures of how data is stored in a SQL database, right? This is really diverging away from strength conditioning talk at this point, but it would be stored in these, and then a lot of the times we would want to do some analysis off that, and it's like, well, how the hell do we get this out of the system, right? So they're like, well, you can export it in a CSV. I'm like, well, damn it, we're paying you guys to host this in essentially a SQL database. Like, we should have access to it. And that's where, like, to have SQL access to the actual raw data within the database, that allows us to then pull it into R, or pull it into Python, and start to actually run some of the visualizations that we couldn't do natively in the platform itself, or some of the statistical analysis that we wanted to run as well. So that's like, I think that's where I got to a point where I'm like, okay, the system is no longer matching our needs. So therefore, let's try to upskill our practitioner or programming capabilities so that we can still answer the questions that we need to answer for the coaches or administration when they're saying, like, well, it looks like these injuries are happening, or it looks like, why are these workloads in these particular ways, or why are well-being metrics looking like they're really sore on Wednesdays, or why are Nordboard numbers down, or why are force plate, like, those are the questions where it's like, I don't want to stand in front of a coach and be like, well, I don't know, like, maybe we went too hard, or maybe we didn't do enough. Like, I want to be able as a coach to have some answers to saying, like, I can give you an opinion, coach, if that's what you want, or I can give you facts. I'm more than willing to give you both, but I don't want, if you want opinions, let's give opinions. If you want facts, here you go. These are what the numbers are showing.
Well, the part that's hard with looking at it over a multi-year trend, right?
Yeah.
Is that each team is different.
Yeah.
And that each athlete now, their role in the team can be exceptionally different. So now it's like people like to talk about how like it takes a couple of years to understand like how practice goes and this, that,
Yeah.
and the other thing. And I think that how many things changed for our team this year.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in practice, but success-wise also. I think it would make it really hard to quantify things in that sense. I think too, I couldn't agree more when you're talking about like basically figuring out what really matters.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that analogy of like the hippo in the room, because as much as we hate, the fact of the matter is simply this: it might not be what we think is best anyway, because we're not the big hippo. Like, we're not, like, I don't know how far down like the Jungle Book ladder we would be, but like we're not, we're not near the top. So like, you can have ideas and you could do things that are awesome, and you could have things set up that are great, but like, even the numbers that you're using to validate what you're doing, if the coach doesn't care that those numbers go up, no matter what you think is important, it doesn't really matter. So then I guess that it comes down to understanding like what your performance team is about and how you can fit better with your sports med guy. Like, there's a webinar Monday that, so hopefully I can record this. So this it'll be like, it would have been 6 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago when I post this, but there's a webinar Monday where someone was talking about force plate data and what they looked at in their studies. And it's one company is putting it on. So like, my initial response to him was, it's a sales pitch. Like, I can tell you the good, bad, and indifferent about that, right now. Like, why people like it, why people should probably be a little more worrisome of it.
Yeah.
Like, but if we sit there for an hour, maybe we can have a better way of understanding what we're looking at and how we can use it better. And I was like, shit, got me. Like, all right, I'll go. I mean, by go, I mean, I'll open my MacBook and I'll hit the button and I'll sit here in the same stool that I'm sitting in the rest of the day, But like, being driven to ask better questions to find better answers, like Charlie talked about, like, you got to be able to ask the questions you didn't know you had to find the answers you didn't know you need. And I think that like, you need to have numbers, yes, but you also need to understand that numbers are like N of one and date of one specific too.
Very true.
So it's like, that I think is the part, because it's cool. Like, people love to talk about like predictive models, right? And that's one of the things that they're going to talk about, is like certain numbers show up and correlate to knee injuries and blah, blah, blah. To which I've already got like 8 questions. Be like, okay, but, like how can you use software to determine whether or not like a kinematic motion is coming from something that's measuring kinetics, right? Like, you can't tell me that unless there's some form of like foot pressure mapping, you can't tell me that they're valgusing or not when they land, or you can't really tell me what part of the foot they land on, or like, you can kind of get into some stiffness stuff, but the other thing, like, how does height displacement and things of that, when we're talking like my 5'10"-ish point guard and my 6'11" monster of a center, like, how do limb length change into that? Like, if you're telling me it's just the hypotenuse of the triangle, well, I say bullshit, because it's not a triangle, it's a 3D pyramid, because your leg goes like that and it can go like that or like that. So is it going, what's the true direction of it? So I think too, like, and I keep telling myself this, because I'm the worst at this, bro. I'm the worst at this. like Donskoff says, like pointing the thumb. What we want is we want to run some test and for it to be like, go do this and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. It just doesn't happen. Like, it sucks. But you know what? You're dealing with people, man. And like, we're all weird. We're all
complex
different.
systems. Yeah. It's not as easy as just do this and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. And it sucks. Like, that sucks. Because you know what? There's people that are like us that are like, nope, I'm going to figure it out. And it's like, you get close, and then all of a sudden, like, there's something that happens that makes you turn around. Like Chris Tucker in Rush Hour, right? You're like, which one of y'all just kicked me? Because you don't know, like, what you're staring at anymore.
Yeah.
And so is it that this person's the outlier, or is it that, like, all the work I did was just bullshit and I suck? You know, and then it's like, well, I got to start over. When really you might have been right, or you might have found the answer, or the answer is, it could be either of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple things that bridge off top of that. So in that Upstream book, they talk about that if you are only driven by numbers, if your incentive is to improve a number, right, what they've found historically is that becomes a big driver force, right? So like if I'm going to be incentivized by making sure that our peak power is up or our node board numbers are up, then I'm going to be doing things to try to influence just solely that, right? At the expense potentially of the quality aspect of it, right? So holding that thought aside and then combining that with essentially like thinking about that, it just makes me it makes me think that, like, I'm trying to think of where I'm losing my train of thought here, because there's like two books that I've read in the past, but like, Astro Ball. So that's another great one where they went and there was like their data analytics team was like, no, there's a better way. Like, forget what your scouts are saying and follow the numbers, right? And then these old school scouts on the other side was like, oh man, this is a utility guy. Like, he has all the tools to be successful. And so what the Houston Astros did before stealing signs and blatantly cheating is that they said, look, this analytics team, they actually have some power to it, right? This is let's use some of the qualities that make them successful, but let's not discount what the scouts have done, and they've trained their eye over the 30 years of being a professional scout. Let's marry the two and actually combine the subjective and the objective together into an algorithm that allows us to take the best of both of these. So that's where, when you're like, yeah, man, like we all want this like way of saying like, well, the computer is telling us X, so we got to do Y. Like, we must do Y. That's this false like security that we have where we can be like, well, it wasn't our fault. The computer told us to do this. They told us the protocol. We just followed the FIFA 11 and they said that, or whatever it might be, right? But I think the humans and bodies are so elegantly complex that sort of linear like connection between the two doesn't exist. So then it makes me start to think of like, we as a coach, as a practitioner, I don't think will ever be replaced by a computer or by an algorithm or by, a system that's going to tell us what to do. Because ultimately we still have to I look at us, we're like the scouts. There's computers that might be more like the data analytics team. And it's like, we still need to combine this in some rational way of saying like, man, okay, when they jump on the force plate, their peak power is this, or their RSI is this, or when they're doing their eccentric braking, it looks like this. And then when we do the motion capture, or if you want to do FMS, or you're using Fusionetics, or you're using some type of system that's looking at sort of the qualities of their movement patterns, you're like, oh, that looks off. Okay, now I got those two ideas that I'm holding. And then when I watch them squat, okay, that's, their femur length's about as long as my entire body. Okay, cool. And now at some way we need to start to formulate all of these ideas in our head of saying like, yeah, it's not like we can't just expect that the FMS tells us to do this, or that or this motion capture system or Dari tells us to do that, or the force plate says their peak power is down or their Sparta is down. So, we need to improve their load, explode, or drive or what. Like, it's just way too elegantly complex, which is fascinating, which is also great job security, I think, for us, because you can't replace us with a computer system that just says, instead of hiring Jay, like, we just bought this $20,000 computer software that just tells us how to predictively train. But like, yeah, I think it's a false insurance security policy to think that we can just, this is what their DARI vulnerability score is. I'll probably be sued. But like, no, like, I just ultimately think it's a fallacy to believe that we can just keep things so predictively, I guess, derived that it would ever remove a coach from saying that doesn't look right, or these are my opinions, despite the numbers. I think it has to be a combination, like Astroball. It needs to be a combination of what we see as a practitioner or a team of practitioners, and then also what the numbers say to say, okay, cool. But ultimately, who owns that final decision before we pull the trigger and say, yes, no? This is something like I really began fascinated with this, like as I started down this rabbit hole of numbers and analytics and sports science, is like Dave Tenney used to say, like, well, who ultimately makes the final decision? Like, who owns that decision? Like, and how do we come to that decision-making process? So if it is like, like a team of teams where it's like, look, man, I don't care about who makes that decision, but like ultimately as a team, like if we're focused on winning, we're focused on improving athletes, like I that's fine. Like, I just want to win. Like I've watched many like Charlie webinars. It's like, hey man, it's not about ultimately who gets the credit. It's about winning and positioning these guys in a way of winning. And it's like, then to contrast that with like Dave's, it's like, well, if we're going to be judged or evaluated on the decisions that we make as practitioners, then who ultimately gets to say, no, like, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this? Or, is it a team approach? Is it a boardroom approach? But somebody ultimately is going to sit at the head of the boardroom, or unless it's a majority vote, like I, nay, like, okay, cool. Like, I'm fine with that too. But I think we need to have a conversation surrounding the way that we integrate the objective and the subjective, and then ultimately the decision-making capabilities around, or otherwise it's like, it might be 9 rogue actors that are just all making decisions with no team collaborative approach to how those decisions, positively affect each other through synergy, or negatively affect each other through accumulation of too much workloads or contrasting biological factors.
I think the person in the performance realm, and people probably get pissed when I say this, that needs to be the one that makes that final decision, is a sports medicine person, like, because here's the thing, dude, like, above and beyond all of it, right? Like, especially right now when some people have time. I'm still drowning in my kitchen with work, but like, at the end of the day, mistakes and issues come back on them, and they've got to handle it at the end. So like, if you need to pull back on some things and make some changes so that this person doesn't have to deal with X, Y, or Z for the next 6 or 8 weeks, and then the kid's more able to play or practice or whatever, I think that's the right way to do it. Now, I know there's people that are like, they're too conservative, they're this, they're that, they're the other. That's fine. Well, you have to be able, one, to express what your opinion is, and B, show why you have that opinion, right? Like, there's 3 types of lies, right? There's white lies, there's lies and statistics. Like, we can sit here and throw numbers and talk about things, but like, at the end of the day, like, the health and well-being is always going to be number one.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely like the performance guy, right? I mean, like, damn, Dr. Yes is, through and through, but it's at the same time, dude, like, if you can't sit down and talk with sports med prac and literally take a step back and listen and be like, all right, I'm diverging to this, then I don't know what to tell you. Sounds like the little ones are ready to go outside and play, man.
They have invaded the patio space.
Nah, dude. Well, listen,
but
man,
these guys,
this has been a rad hour.
No.
This has been a rad
Yeah,
hour,
man.
dude.
I appreciate jumping on.
Yeah, man. It's always great to see you.
I
Glad to see
appreciate
you doing
always
well.
catching up with you and and sort of getting to think about how other people think and having some conversations. It's been I think, you know, outside of, you know, people that are balancing families and having a little bit more home life, restoring that harmony or that balance, or, you know, there's a number of like influential coaches in my life that's you, whether it's distant, whether they know it or not, but people talk about like work-life balance, and they talk about like it's never going to be a balance. Like I'm always going to prioritize home life. And I love that. But like for those that have struggled with professional demands and home life demands and family demands and being a great friend or being a great brother, or things like that, or father or mother or whatever it might be, that like the silver lining in some of this is like, boy, this is really making us pause and reflect about, at least for me, like pause and reflect about like areas where I can get better in other avenues. And it's not always sitting in front of a computer, or always being in front of an athlete or on the weight room floor. It's like, how do I help these little guys continue to develop and teach them how to add and subtract and write and do their things. And it's like, it's been a really rewarding time, and also like it's challenging because I'm disrupting their routine by being home more often. I found I'm probably more disruptive, but it's also makes me pause and reflect about like, man, you know, like I just remember like I said like, oh, I'm really struggling to disconnect, and like this is a forced disconnection, and then I'm also trying to balance, like, as I think you are a prime example of, like always wanting to try to get better and wanting to improve and work ahead and do things that will position us to be, I don't know, successful or better off. And it's like, maybe I'm my own worst enemy. You know, like maybe I need what will help me be better is to disconnect and really reconnect with other people around me, like you. and and I think, you know, that might be the way that fuels and powers us to move forward. So like this is, as much as like I love being in front of the 30 athletes that I serve, like I love to be home, and I'm reconnecting with some of these guys more often, and really try to restore that balance and maybe tilt it in the opposite direction, and really make the most of this opportunity.
Go do it, brother. Great to see you.
Yeah,
As always,
likewise.
awesome talk,
Likewise, man.
Cheers.
See ya.
Later. And a huge thanks to Adam Ringler for spending the time with us today. Guys, open, honest, candid sharing. And I never talk to Adam and don't walk away without saying, wow, and asking myself questions about things that we're doing and ways we can be better. And this talk was no different. Adam, I can't thank you enough for all you've done to support us and support the entire profession of strength and conditioning to help us all become better. Your open, honest, and candid sharing are so appreciated, my man. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work down there in Boulder. We truly appreciate it. And as always, guys, if you did enjoy the talk, please share it to the social media outlet of your choice, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. As always, we're just trying to get the best information out there to all the great coaches that we can. And as always, guys, thank you for everything you do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.